The grandfather clock in the marble foyer struck 3 in the morning, its deep chimes echoing through the silent corridors of the Whitmore estate. James Whitmore, still in his tailored suit from the emergency board meeting that had dragged well past midnight, loosened his silk tie as he climbed the sweeping staircase. His company had just avoided a hostile takeover, but victory felt hollow when you had no one to share it with. The soft glow of the nursery nightlight caught his attention as he passed the second-floor landing. Strange. That room had been empty for months, sealed off like a tomb since his wife's death 2 years ago. James's heart hammered against his ribs as he pushed open the door, expecting to find an intruder. Instead, he found something far more shocking. Emma Collins, his head of household staff, sat in the antique rocking chair, cradling a baby against her chest. The infant nursed peacefully, tiny fingers curled around Emma's thumb, completely unaware of the storm about to break. Emma's dark hair fell like a curtain around the child, and in the amber lamplight, she looked almost ethereal. But what happened next shocked everyone watching from the doorway. James stepped into the room, his Italian leather shoes silent on the Persian rug, and Emma looked up with startled eyes. "Mr. Whitmore, I can explain." "Whose baby is that?" His voice came out rougher than intended, cutting through the nursery's peaceful atmosphere like a blade. Emma's arms tightened protectively around the infant, who stirred at the sound of unfamiliar voices. "Sir, please, if you could just give me a moment to." "I asked you a question, Emma." James moved closer, and something in the baby's profile made him freeze mid-step. The slope of the nose, the way the tiny ears curved just slightly at the tips. Features he recognized from looking in the mirror every morning for 35 years. Little did James know that this moment would unravel everything he thought he knew about his life. "The baby is mine," Emma whispered, but her voice wavered with uncertainty, as if she wasn't entirely convinced of her own words. James studied her face in the dim light. Emma had worked for his family for 3 years, arriving just after his wife Caroline's cancer diagnosis. She'd been a godsend during those dark months, managing the household while he juggled business and medical appointments. After Caroline's death, Emma had become the only constant in his rapidly shrinking world. But he'd never noticed her being pregnant. Never seen her with a man. Never heard her mention family beyond her elderly mother in rural Pennsylvania. "How old?" The question came out sharper than he intended. 3 months. Emma's voice was barely audible now. James did the math quickly. 9 months plus 3 meant. His breath caught. Caroline had died 14 months ago, but those final weeks had been a blur of morphine and false hopes. Could he have been so consumed with grief that he'd missed something this significant happening under his own roof? "Where's the father?" he pressed, moving another step closer. Emma's eyes flashed with something between pain and defiance. "That's not your concern, Mr. Whitmore." This decision would change everything, but James couldn't shake the feeling that those tiny features looked hauntingly familiar. The baby chose that moment to pull away from Emma and look directly at James with eyes the exact shade of stone gray that had stared back at him from every Whitmore family portrait for generations. The same eyes his father had, and his grandfather before him. Eyes that photographers always commented on during business magazine shoots. Emma followed his gaze and saw the recognition dawning on his face. She stood abruptly, clutching the baby closer. "I should go." "I'm sorry I disturbed you, sir." The baby was fussy, and this room has the best acoustics for calming." "Emma." His voice stopped her at the doorway. "We need to talk." "Tomorrow morning." "My office." 8 sharp. She nodded without turning around, her shoulders rigid with tension. James watched her disappear down the hall, the baby's tiny head visible over her shoulder, and felt his world tilt on its axis. But the real shock was still coming. As James stood alone in the nursery, surrounded by the ghost of his wife's dreams and the echo of a baby's cry, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. On the changing table sat a small silver rattle, tarnished with age. He picked it up with trembling fingers, recognizing the intricate engraving immediately. It was his own baby rattle, the one Caroline had saved in her hope chest for the children they'd never had. The silence in the mansion's hallway feels deafening as James stands frozen outside the nursery door. His mind races, replaying what he just witnessed. Emma's gentle humming still echoes in his ears, but now it carries an entirely different weight. The way the baby looked up at her, those familiar blue eyes that mirror his own reflection every morning. James pushes the door open wider, his expensive Italian shoes clicking against the hardwood floor. Emma jumps, nearly dropping the infant as she spins around to face him. Her face drains of color, and in that moment, he sees something he's never noticed before: fear. "Mr. Whitmore," she whispers, clutching the baby protectively against her chest. "I can explain." "Can you?" His voice carries the same authority he uses in boardrooms, but there's something else beneath it, a tremor of uncertainty that surprises even him. "Because right now, I'm struggling to understand why my maid is nursing a child in the middle of the night." Emma's jaw tightens, and for a flash, he sees steel beneath her usual submissive demeanor. "She was crying. I heard her from my room down the hall. Mrs. Patterson was sound asleep, and I couldn't just let her suffer." But James isn't listening to her explanation anymore. He's studying the baby's features in the dim nursery light. That distinctive cleft chin, the way her tiny fingers curl, details that make his chest constrict with recognition. Whose child is this, Emma? The question hangs in the air like a guillotine. Emma's eyes dart toward the window, then back to his face, and he catches something else there, resignation mixed with defiance. "She's Mrs. Patterson's daughter, sir. You know that." "Do I?" He steps closer, and Emma instinctively backs toward the crib. "Because looking at her now, I'm starting to question everything I thought I knew about this situation." What happens next sends viewers' minds racing with possibilities. Emma's phone buzzes against the nightstand, a sound that shouldn't matter, but the way she flinches makes James's suspicions crystallize into something darker. 3 weeks earlier, Emma Collins had stood in the parking lot of Cedar Valley Hospital, her hands shaking as she answered a call that would change everything. The voice on the other end was clinical, matter-of-fact, delivering news that made her knees buckle. "Miss Collins, we need to discuss your sister's situation. The debt collectors are getting aggressive, and without immediate payment." Emma had closed her eyes, watching her last semester of nursing school slip away like sand through her fingers. Sarah needed surgery, expensive, life-saving surgery that their insurance wouldn't cover. The medical bills had already consumed their parents' retirement savings, and now the threats were escalating. "How much time do we have?" she'd whispered into the phone. 2 months, maybe 3 if you're lucky." That's when Mrs. Patterson's job posting had appeared like a miracle. A live-in position with one of the wealthiest families in Connecticut, offering a salary that could cover Sarah's surgery with enough left over to restart her dreams. But Mrs. Patterson had been specific about one requirement: absolute discretion about her personal life. Back in the present, James watches Emma's face transform as memories flood through her. What he doesn't know is that every night for the past 2 months, Emma has been torn between her growing attachment to this baby and the desperate knowledge that her sister's life hangs in the balance. "Emma," James says again, his voice softer now. "I need the truth." But before she can answer, her phone buzzes again. This time, she can't hide her reaction fast enough. The screen lights up with a name that makes her blood run cold: St. Mary's Hospital. James notices her distraction and the way her face crumples with worry. For the first time since entering the nursery, he sees past his own suspicions to recognize genuine anguish in her expression. "Take the call," he says quietly. Emma shakes her head, but the phone won't stop buzzing. Finally, with trembling fingers, she accepts the call. "Emma Collins?" The voice is urgent, professional. "We need you to come in immediately. Your sister's condition has deteriorated, and there are decisions that need to be made tonight." The phone slips from Emma's grasp, clattering to the floor. The baby in her arms seems to sense the shift in energy and begins to fuss, but Emma barely notices. Her world has just tilted off its axis. James steps forward instinctively, and for a moment, the tension between them dissolves into something entirely human. But just as quickly, reality crashes back in. I have to go, Emma whispers, moving toward the door. Wait. James's voice stops her cold. We're not finished here. Tomorrow morning, we're going to have a conversation about everything, the baby, your late-night visits to this nursery, and whatever else you're hiding from me. Emma turns back to face him, and in her eyes, he sees something that makes his chest tight. It's not just fear anymore, it's the look of someone who has nothing left to lose. As she disappears into the hallway, James is left alone with the baby, who has finally settled into peaceful sleep. But peace is the last thing on his mind. Because tomorrow, he's going to order a DNA test that will either confirm his worst suspicions or shatter everything he thinks he knows about the woman who just walked out of his life. And in 12 hours, the results will arrive with news that neither of them could have possibly prepared for. The silence in the lab felt suffocating as James paced back and forth, his expensive Italian leather shoes clicking against the sterile white floor. Dr. Martinez, the lab director, had told him the initial results would be ready within hours, but now something felt different. The urgency in the technician's voice when she'd called him back to the facility sent his heart racing. Mr. Whitmore, please sit down, Dr. Martinez said, his usually confident demeanor replaced by something that looked almost like confusion. I've been running DNA tests for over 20 years, and I've never seen results quite like these. James felt his blood run cold. What do you mean, quite like these? Either the child is mine or he isn't. The doctor adjusted his glasses, studying the papers in front of him with intense concentration. The initial test came back inconclusive. The DNA markers are unusual. We're seeing familial connections, but not in the way we expected. I need to run additional tests to be absolutely certain. Additional tests? James's voice cracked slightly. How long will that take? 48 hours, minimum. Maybe 72. Meanwhile, across town, Emma sat in the cramped kitchen of her childhood home, her younger sister Sarah watching her with worried eyes. The modest apartment was a stark contrast to the Whitmore mansion, with its peeling wallpaper and second-hand furniture that had seen better decades. Emma, you look terrible, Sarah said, pouring another cup of coffee. You haven't slept in days. What's really going on? Emma's hands trembled as she held the warm mug. I can't tell you everything, but I'm in trouble, Sarah. Real trouble. The kind that could destroy everything I've worked for. Is this about the job at that rich guy's house? You've been acting strange ever since you started working there. Sarah leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. Does this have something to do with little Michael? The mention of the baby's name made Emma's eyes fill with tears. I've been caring for him like he was my own. Every night, every feeding, every moment of comfort when he cried. And now... She couldn't finish the sentence. Now what? Now I might lose him forever. Emma wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. And the worst part is, Mr. Whitmore thinks I've been lying to him. He doesn't understand that everything I've done has been out of love. Back at the mansion, Mrs. Henderson knocked softly on James's study door. The elderly housekeeper had worked for the Whitmore family for over 30 years, and she'd never seen her employer in such a state of distress. Sir? You missed dinner again. Should I have cook prepare something light? James looked up from his desk, where he'd been staring at the same contract for the past hour without reading a single word. Mrs. Henderson, how long has Emma been with us? About 8 months now, sir. She came to us through the agency, excellent references. She's been wonderful with baby Michael. The housekeeper paused. Sir, if you don't mind my saying, she truly cares for that child. I've watched her with him, and there's something special there. Special how? The way she holds him, sings to him. It's like she was meant to be his mother. Mrs. Henderson's eyes grew thoughtful. There was one night, about a month ago, when Michael had that terrible fever. Emma stayed up all night, never leaving his side. She was more worried than any nanny I've ever seen. James felt a knot forming in his stomach. Could he have been wrong about Emma? The thought of accusing an innocent woman of deception made him feel sick, but the alternative, that she might actually be the child's biological mother, seemed impossible given what he knew. His phone buzzed with a text message from Dr. Martinez. Need to discuss results immediately. Can you come in tonight? The urgency in those words sent James rushing to his car, his mind racing with possibilities. As he drove through the quiet streets toward the medical facility, he couldn't shake the image of Emma's face when he'd confronted her, the hurt, the confusion, and something else he couldn't quite identify. At the same time, Emma was making a decision that would change everything. She pulled out her phone and dialed a number she'd memorized but never expected to call. "Hello," a woman's voice answered on the other end. "It's Emma. I think it's time to tell the truth. All of it." The silence stretched between them before the voice responded. "Are you sure you're ready for this? Once we start down this path, there's no going back." Emma looked at a photo on her sister's refrigerator, a picture of herself holding baby Michael on his first day home from the hospital, both of them glowing with an inexplicable connection. "I'm ready. Mr. Whitmore deserves to know the truth, and so does Michael." As James pulled into the medical center's parking lot, his hands were shaking so badly he could barely turn off the engine. Whatever Dr. Martinez had discovered was about to turn his world upside down, and deep in his heart, he knew that nothing would ever be the same again. James's hands trembled as he stared at the phone, the lab director's words echoing in his mind. The test results weren't what he expected, they were something far more shocking. He needed answers, and he needed them now. Racing through the marble corridors of his mansion, James burst into Dr. Martinez's lab office without knocking. The elderly scientist looked up from his computer, startled by the billionaire's sudden appearance. "Mr. Whitmore, I wasn't expecting." "The results," James interrupted, his voice sharp with urgency. "You said there was something I needed to see immediately. What did you find?" Dr. Martinez adjusted his glasses nervously. "Sir, perhaps you should sit down. These findings are unprecedented." "Just tell me," James demanded, gripping the edge of the desk. "The DNA shows a 99.7% probability that you are the biological father," Dr. Martinez said carefully, "but there's something else. The child's blood work reveals markers indicating severe nutritional deficiencies that were recently corrected. Someone has been providing specialized care, medical-grade formula and supplements that aren't available over the counter." James felt the world tilt beneath his feet. His child. His actual child. But how was that possible? He'd never even met Emma before she started working for him 6 months ago. Meanwhile, upstairs in her small quarters, Emma was frantically packing her few belongings into a worn duffel bag. Her hands shook as she folded baby clothes, tears streaming down her face. She'd heard James racing through the house, and she knew her time was up. "I'm sorry, mi amor," she whispered to the sleeping infant in the travel crib. "Mama tried to protect us both." She'd almost made it to the service entrance when James's voice boomed through the hallway. "Emma! Stop right there!" She froze, her shoulders sagging in defeat. Slowly, she turned to face him, still clutching the baby carrier. "Going somewhere?" His tone was ice cold, but his eyes showed something else entirely: pain, confusion, and a desperate need for truth. "Mr. Whitmore, please," Emma's voice cracked. "Let me explain." "Explain what?" "How you've been lying to me for months. How you've been taking care of my child without telling me." His voice rose with each word, the magnitude of the deception hitting him fully. "But wait, there's something you need to know about what really happened that night 6 months ago, and why Emma recognized James the moment she first saw him walking through his own front door." Emma's composure finally shattered. "Lying to you? You think I've been lying?" She set the carrier down carefully, her maternal instincts never wavering even in crisis. "You want the truth, James? The real truth?" The use of his first name shocked him into silence. 6 months ago, I was working 2 jobs to pay for my mother's cancer treatment," Emma continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "I was a cocktail waitress at the Meridian Hotel downtown. Do you remember that night? The night you were so drunk after losing the Henderson merger that hotel security had to help you to your room? James's face went pale. Fragments of that terrible night began filtering back, the business deal that had fallen through, the excessive drinking, the hotel room he barely remembered. You were so broken, Emma whispered, tears flowing freely now. So lost. You kept talking about how everyone in your life only wanted your money, how alone you felt. And I. Her voice faltered. You what? James's anger was dissolving into something far more complex. I stayed with you that night because you were human for the first time I'd ever seen. Not the ruthless billionaire from the newspapers, just a man who was hurting. Emma's revelation hung in the air between them like a bridge neither had expected to cross. James staggered backward, the full weight of the truth crushing down on him. That night. The night he'd tried so hard to forget, to bury under work and responsibility. The night he'd been more vulnerable than he'd ever allowed himself to be. When I found out I was pregnant, Emma continued, I tried to find you, but your people wouldn't let me anywhere near you. Then when this job opened up. She gestured around the opulent mansion. I thought maybe it was fate giving me a chance to let you know your son, even if you never knew he was yours. The baby stirred in his carrier, making soft cooing sounds that seemed to fill the enormous silence between them. James looked from Emma to the child, his child, and felt something fundamental shift inside his chest. But before he could process everything he'd just learned, Emma's phone buzzed with an urgent message that would change everything they thought they knew about that night at the hotel. The laboratory director's hands trembled as he held the final DNA report, his face grave with the weight of revelation. Mr. Whitmore, he said slowly, the results are conclusive. The child is indeed your biological son. James felt the world tilt beneath his feet. The elegant marble floor of the lab seemed to shift as the truth crashed over him like a tsunami. His son. Not some stranger's child that Emma had been secretly caring for, but his own flesh and blood. The familiar eyes he'd glimpsed that night, the curve of the tiny fingers, they were his family's features, passed down through generations of Whitmores. But how is that possible? James whispered, his voice barely audible above the hum of laboratory equipment. I don't understand. The drive back to his mansion passed in a blur of racing thoughts and pounding heartbeats. Every assumption he'd made, every accusation he'd leveled at Emma, now felt like stones in his chest. He burst through the front doors to find Emma in the nursery, gently rocking the baby, tears streaming down her face as she whispered soft lullabies. Emma, he called out, his voice cracking with emotion. We need to talk. She looked up, her eyes red-rimmed but defiant. I know what you think of me, Mr. Whitmore. I know you believe I'm some kind of deceiver, but... The baby is mine, James interrupted, the words falling between them like a bridge across an impossible chasm. The DNA test, he's my son. Emma's composure finally shattered. She clutched the baby closer, her body shaking with sobs that seemed to come from the depths of her soul. I tried to tell you, she whispered through her tears. That night 6 months ago, when you came home devastated about your father's death, when you'd been drinking and crying about feeling so alone in that massive house. You were grieving, and I was there. The memories flooded back with startling clarity. That terrible night when his father had passed away unexpectedly, when the weight of inheriting the family empire had crushed down on him like a physical force. Emma had found him collapsed in his study, brought him tea, listened as he poured out years of loneliness and fear. In his vulnerability and grief, something beautiful and unexpected had happened between them, a connection that transcended their different worlds. You left the next morning for that 3-month business trip to Asia, Emma continued, her voice steady despite her tears. When you returned, I was already showing, but you never noticed. Why would you? I was just the help. And then when Thomas was born, I knew I had to protect him from growing up feeling unwanted, the way you described feeling as a child. James sank into the rocking chair beside her, the magnitude of her sacrifice overwhelming him. You've been caring for our son alone for 3 months. Working double shifts, sending money to your sick mother, all while raising my child in secret because you thought I wouldn't want him. I've seen how you are with business associates, Emma said softly. Cold, calculating, always protecting your reputation. I couldn't risk you seeing Thomas as just another problem to solve, another scandal to contain. He deserves better than that. James reached out tentatively, and Emma placed little Thomas in his arms. The baby gazed up at him with those unmistakably Whitmore blue eyes, and James felt his heart expand in ways he'd never imagined possible. "He's perfect," he whispered, touching the tiny fingers that immediately wrapped around his own. "And you, Emma, you're extraordinary. You've given him more love and care in 3 months than I received in my entire childhood. What happens now?" Emma asked, fear creeping back into her voice. James looked at her, really looked at her, for perhaps the first time. He saw the intelligence behind her gentle brown eyes, the strength in her shoulders that had carried impossible burdens, the selfless love that had driven every decision she'd made. "Now we become the family that Thomas deserves," he said firmly. "The family I never knew I was desperately searching for." Over the following weeks, the Whitmore mansion transformed. James moved his office to the wing near the nursery, conducting video conferences while Thomas napped nearby. He watched in amazement as Emma guided him through diaper changes and feeding schedules, her patience infinite as he stumbled through the basics of fatherhood. "Your mother's medical bills are taken care of," James told Emma one evening as they sat together in the nursery, Thomas sleeping peacefully between them. "And I've enrolled in those child development classes you mentioned. I want to learn how to be the father he needs." Emma smiled, the first truly relaxed expression he'd seen from her. "He already loves you, you know. Look how he reaches for you when he hears your voice." 3 months later, James stood before the board of Whitmore Industries, his son gurgling happily in Emma's arms at the back of the boardroom. "Effective immediately, I'm implementing a comprehensive family support program for all employees," he announced. "Paid parental leave, on-site childcare, and flexible working arrangements. Because I've learned that the measure of true success isn't the size of your bank account, it's the depth of your relationships and the legacy of love you leave behind." As the board members filed out, discussing this unexpected shift in company culture, Emma approached with Thomas. "Your shareholders seem surprised by the changes," she observed. James took his son, marveling as always at the perfect trust in those bright blue eyes. "They'll adjust. And if they don't, they're welcome to invest elsewhere. This company will now reflect our family values, compassion, integrity, and putting people before profits." That evening, as they tucked Thomas into his crib, Emma turned to James with a question that had been building for weeks. "What are we, James? I mean, what are we to each other?" James cupped her face gently, seeing not just the woman who had saved his son, but the one who had saved his soul. "We're whatever we choose to be," he said softly. "But I know what I hope we are. I hope we're the beginning of a love story that our son will be proud to tell his own children someday." Emma's smile lit up the entire room. "I'd like that very much." As they stood together in the softly lit nursery, their son sleeping peacefully nearby, James realized that sometimes the most precious gifts come disguised as ordinary moments. A maid's compassion had revealed a father's heart, a secret had become a second chance, and a midnight discovery had changed not just their lives, but their understanding of what family truly means. This story reminds us that love often arrives when we least expect it, in forms we don't recognize, through people we might otherwise overlook. Have you ever had a moment that completely changed your perspective on what matters most? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.